Whitney Hopler wrote this: "Don't settle for anything less than the best. Making God your top priority, live out your faith 24/7 rather than just on Sunday mornings. Do life God's way instead of your way." When we allow our gaze to be fixed on God, and when we are still and quiet, all of our confusion settles down. His comforting closeness can be felt, his direction discerned, and our response will always be sure. Welcome to this week's Hope from the Hills. The Bible says this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. That's Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. Has anyone ever said anything unkind, untrue, or hurtful about you? Does God, who is a loving father, want or desire that his children should suffer? How much does he expect us to endure? And at what point do we walk away or make things right? And is it ever permissible for us to fight back? Becoming the recipients of slander or malicious gossip can be more than a little difficult to bear. And yet in these moments, God calls us to exhibit a very specific response to those things that are against us. God's nature and character is loving, fair, just, and always reasonable. And our primary response when hurt should be to trust him in all situations and allow him to move in his ways and not ours. Not always easy when we're feeling battered or torn down, and yet the essential truth is that God has and never will abandon you, nor expect you to manage and cope with any trial alone. When we're put into situations we did not cause, it can be tempting to sink into a state of despair. Allowing God's surrendered freedom to work in our circumstances is a beginning to see ourselves rising up, and through the fire of these moments actually become a better version of ourselves than we were before. Stop and remember God is still on your side, in spite of what you might feel and in spite of what you might see immediately in front of you. Respond by looking beyond where you find yourself, and in the face of temptation, keep and maintain your integrity. These are moments that you are never alone, and God, faithful and true to his promises, will never fail or forsake you. Let him use these moments to fulfill his often unseen purposes and plan that he has to ensure that all things, despite how they appear, will, in the midst of his absolute and perfect timing, work together for good. There is an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every moment under the sun. That's the words of Solomon from Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 1. When we feel overwhelmed, under pressure or attacked, remember to give control over to him and respond by letting go and let God. The challenge here is to let go of perceived control and strength. God always maintains control of those situations around us, with the invitation to rest in his strength. Our response? To simply submit to his will and trust him, even if all around us is chaotic and uncertain. Surrendered will bring victory and the clearer understanding of God and his ability to fulfill all that he says and he promises. So often we believe and subscribe to the notion that people should behave and act in a certain way, that life should go our way and not happen while we're busy making other plans. All too often we expect God to honour our goals, aspirations and expectations. But when we let go and let God, we let go of entitlement and respond by allowing him to direct us in ways which are so often shaped differently and never inferior to our own. His supernatural peace and power will cut through the darkness of our own behaviour and thinking, liberating us to respond each and every time counter to the prevailing culture around us. He will never fail or forsake you, an absolute solid promise from Deuteronomy 31 and verse 6. We will never be immune to times and seasons where we find ourselves on the receiving end of that which we simply did not deserve. People will hurt, disappoint and break promises to us. And in these moments our response should always be to run to him rather than from him. These are and always will be the let go and let God moments. So, develop and nurture relationships with those who will support you prayerfully and remind you of the truth that God is in control. Immerse yourself in the solidity of God's promises. He is faithful and his mercies never end. Heaven and earth may well pass away, but his word remains, and his promises never fail. And cast your cares upon him, for he cares for you. Unclench your fists, open your hands in both worship and surrender, naming that which you are letting go of, and taking hold of his power, his love, his comfort that leads to breakthrough, restoration, hope, and the place where all things have, as we reflect and look back, worked in our lives together for good. I'll see you next time.